Imagine a city where a bunch of teenagers are fainting in the middle of the streets, and police are very overwhelmed by the screaming crowds and just them going crazy. It wasn't it wasn't a natural disaster, nor a political uprising, but it was because of the Beatles. In 1963, Beatlemania took a hold of Britain in a way that the country had never seen before. Now, either you grew up listening to Here Comes the Sun, or you never heard a Beatles album before. Never heard of a Beatles album before. Understanding how this band influenced an entire culture helps us understand how music, media, and youth culture affects in the society. The story of the Beatles shows how 4 young boys in Liverpool shaped an entire world through British culture. So let's go to these 3 specific points on how they did that. 1, giving young audiences a shared cultural identity. 2, contributing to a shift from a British attitudes to social class, and transforming British popular music to a symbol of national pride. So first things first, let's jump to where they gave young audiences a shared cultural identity. Now, before the Beatles even happened, the British culture was fabricated to the fact that it didn't really make sense at the time. So, back then, according to Collins, he described that the height of Beatlemania of 1963 to 65 spread into institutions far removed from music, to the fact that schools adopted Beatles-inspired outfits and gave young boys guitar lessons. Now, he also explained that the public emotional expressions that you've seen through the young audiences, not just the audiences, but young females specifically, represented a form expression of how British society had traditionally suppressed. And now we get to the part where the Beatles, they have changed British attitudes of social class. Liverpool in the 1950s was like a working class city, but it wasn't necessarily a place people expected to become a worldwide cultural phenomenon. Collins explained that there were several public incidents that exposed class tensions towards the band itself, to the fact that a golf club expelled them for wearing leather jackets. And not only a golf club, but a nightclub as well, turned away one of the Beatles members, George Harrison, for wearing a tie. Can you imagine that? And Collins also notes that the Beatles' rise contributed to a cultural shift in the 1960s. A prime example to that is the Royalty Verity performance, where John Lennon joked to the British, to the royalty, matter of fact, telling them to rattle your jewelry. And the look on their faces, they'd enjoy that so much, including the Queen of England. And at that moment, the British press used that moment as evidence to show that the class borders were loosening. Now we get to the part where how the Beatles transformed British popular music into a national pride symbol. Now, back then, the British were mostly known for importing American popular music at the time, internationally. After the quote-unquote British invasion in the 1964 of the American music charts, as they call it, the Fab Four established a distinguished British sound that the whole wide world wanted to hear. And the British began exploring the popular culture instead of importing it. Now, the British and the Americans media back then, they recognized as the Beatles as they were saying they recognized them as the international perceptions of Britain. Excuse me. The New Musical Express even credited them for thanking them with doing more of Britain's doing global standing from Britain, rather than just being a quote-unquote resident of diplomats and statesmen. Through the Beatles, popular music became a vehicle for national identity. Now, in summary, with those three point of views, now we understand why the Beatles influenced the 1960s British so much. In summary, because one, they gave younger audiences a shared cultural identity. They contributed to a shift of British attitudes towards social class, and they changed the British popular music into a symbol of national pride. So remember those teenagers? You remember those teenagers just fainted in the streets and policemen very overwhelmed by them? Those reactions, not only that they reflected more than just catchy songs and charming smiles, but more so a broader to cultural shift from in Britain. So the Beatles, learning about the story of the Beatles shows how culture, the youth culture as well, and the music, they can all intersect. And more than a century later, people are still listening to them to this day.